Toya Zara will be speaking on the motherhood and homemaking. So Toya is a devoted wife and mother of two under two. Wow. A passionate servant leader and a woman deeply committed to her faith and purpose. She leads the music ministry at her church and regularly ministers through worship, preaching, and using her voice to inspire, uplift, and point others towards Jesus. In her professional life, Toya serves as a corporate events manager at one of the big four firms where she brings strategy, excellence, and creativity to high impact experiences. Alongside her career in ministry, she is completing two master's degrees, demonstrating her dedication to growth and lifelong learning. I had to read that twice because I thought that I was like, did I mess up? Like, sorry. Through her growing digital presence, Toya shares her journey of motherhood, marriage, ambition, and faith, encouraging women to embrace both calling and career with confidence and grace. Without further ado, Toya, welcome.
Hey, ladies. Hello.
Hi.
Honestly, listening to that bio, I'm like, am I crazy? What am I doing? Like,
I
how
like
many
energy
years
drink.
do I have? No, honestly, yeah, I be doing a lot. I'm doing a lot currently. I think it's just part of my current season. Thank you for that. And thank you to all the amazing women who have spoken before me. I feel like I have big shoes to fill. I just pray that the Holy Spirit speaks through me, just as He did through all of you. But yes, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here. My segment is specific to motherhood, homemaking, marriage, and all that stuff. So a little bit about me. I got married quite young. I got married when I was engaged at 21. I think I just turned 21 that weekend. Yes. And then I got married a year and a half after that. I was 22, turning 23. I had my first son at 23. Um, and a year and a half later, I had my daughter. So it's been a busy couple of years. And so I'm finally in the space of motherhood where, so my daughter just turned 1, my son is 2, he's going to be 3 this summer. And I feel like I'm finally in a space where it's me time. Hence why there's all these different things that you're hearing. Like, I decided that I was going to go back to school, something I always wanted to do. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit in stuff I'm going to talk about. So I wanted to focus on 4 segments, because this topic is so broad. I wish I had all the time in the world, but I don't. I want to be respectful to the organizers. So firstly, marriage and motherhood as ministry. I think sometimes, and the reason I mentioned about how I started, how like early things started for me, is I remember people giving me these like, what, girl, are you crazy? You're too young to get married. Like, oh my God, you should have waited to have kids. I've heard everything. I've heard everything under the sun. And it just goes to show how people find that like there's a general consensus that motherhood puts a pause on your entire life. And to a certain extent, it does, but it's not the end of your life. I always like to say it's the beginning of your life. And so if you're somebody who desires motherhood, marriage, and all the stuff, I want to encourage you today. I know it can be quite scary, but as somebody who did it, I want to say I did it alone. I didn't have anybody in my community who was also my age getting married. I was always the youngest in the group. I didn't know what I was doing. I don't have an older sister. I'm the first daughter, and I had to navigate all of that stuff all on my own. So I can say that God has helped me and continues to help me, and it is 100% doable with God. Okay, key there with God. Okay. So yes, I think many people think ministry only happens behind a pulpit, but honestly, one of the greatest ministries that God can entrust a woman with is the shaping of souls inside the home. As a mom, I'm discipling, I'm forming character, and I'm modeling Christ. And it's so interesting because I feel, how do I say this? Those are characteristics of Jesus, and I'm in charge of that for my home, for my kids, right? And when the Bible says to train up a child, it's talking about intentional shaping. When you pray with your children, you correct them with love, you show them how to forgive, and, you teach them to worship and love the Lord. That's kingdom work. That's ministry as well. And so the home is not a small assignment at all. We just had Women's Day, and I think we can all attest to how powerful it is to be a woman, and how powerful it can be to dominate even the space of the home. I always like to say that this is my first ministry. Before anything else that I do, all the different spheres of life that, or the different hats that I wear, this is the first church for me. This is the first ministry. Because as a mom, I'm in charge of laying foundation. Before any pastor preaches to these kids, before any teacher instructs them, I'm in charge of laying the foundation. And so as I dominate all the other spaces of my life, I'm not abandoning my home, if that makes sense. And I think that just means understanding the spiritual authority and the purpose that God has given you within the home. Okay. Number 2, God gives you just enough. I was just talking about this with my sister-in-law, who I think is on the call today. Hey, Chi-Chi, if you're there. I was just talking about how God supplies daily strength. Motherhood has this way of emptying you. It takes everything out of you. It is the ultimate level of sacrifice. I sacrifice for ministry at church and serving God. I sacrifice in my marriage, but motherhood, completely different level of sacrifice. You're sacrificing everything for your children. You're sacrificing your time, your sleep, your energy. Sometimes, your beauty. Motherhood also can take away from, you lose the body you had when you were 19 and everything starts changing and all that stuff. So you can feel really, really empty. And there are days where, you're sleep deprived. Maybe the baby woke up 100 times in the night and the toddler is running wild. I have 2 under 2. And so sometimes my home is quite literally craziness. And you can feel, there are days where you just feel like you have nothing left. But God has this very beautiful way of sustaining mothers. He doesn't always give you the overflow of energy, but he'll give you just enough. You might still be sleep deprived, but somehow you get through your day, and he'll give you, just enough patience, just enough strength, and just enough grace for that specific day. And it kind of reminds me, I said this to my sister-in-law yesterday, it reminds me of when your gas tank is like almost at empty. Does anybody relate? Has anybody ever had those where like you're on E, there ain't nothing left according to the car? There's nothing left. You're empty, right? But somehow you make it. You have just enough to get to the gas station. That's the analogy I like to give. That's how God sustains mothers. Yeah, I can go on a tangent about this, but yes, I wanted to say that. And so, as a mom, every morning when you wake up exhausted, just remember that God says that He's already supplied what you need for the day. And so you have just enough. No matter how you feel, no matter how tired, God gives you just enough. He may not always remove the exhaustion, but He will supply the strength. He will always supply the strength. Another thing I want to talk about is grace for every season. God gives grace for really hard seasons. And one of the most beautiful things about God is that He meets you. His grace meets us where we are. There's grace for postpartum recovery and all the stuff, sleepless nights and seasons where your body is healing, seasons where you feel overwhelmed. There's grace for the days where you can't pray for an hour. There's grace for days where you only have 30 seconds to pray before you fall asleep. Okay. I don't know about you, but I remember when I first had my son, when I had my first child, I was so hard on myself for not being able to show up in the ways that I was used to in terms of prayer and in terms of spending time with God. And I just remember God saying to me, my grace is sufficient. Like, I know where you're at. I'm the one who blessed you with this child. I'm the one who blessed you with this season of motherhood. And so I get it. I know it. I know what it takes to be a mom. And so God understands human limits, and He understands the exhaustion. He created your body. He knows all the stuff that you're going through. And so God's grace is enough, and He gives you just enough. He gives you the grace that you need to sustain you through those seasons. But number 4, the key thing I want to talk about, I hope I'm not running out of time, is when the grace lifts. I've talked about this before somewhere else, but this is so important to know as a mom, as a woman in motherhood, homemaking, all this stuff. Is there's grace for the hard seasons, but that grace doesn't last forever. I remember when God spoke to me about the grace, and I started feeling really good. I'm like, okay, I don't have to feel so guilty when I can't pray for an hour anymore, when I'm not able to show up in the secret place in the way that I was used to. Maybe it looks a little bit different in this season. But at some point, yes, the grace covers the season, but growth also requires movement. And at some point, that grace lifts. The analogy is that if you're here and the grace meets you here, at some point, that grace is going to lift you right here. And you have to lift with that grace, right? God is calling you higher. He's calling you to something else. Grace is not a permission. It's not a permission to stay stuck, right? Like, just because God gives grace doesn't mean that you become lazy, right? And so when the grace lifts and God calls you higher, you have to be discerning. I love what Leila said. There's discernment for every season, right? Am I tired, or am I just being too comfortable? Am I recovering, or am I remaining in a place where God has already called me out of? I went through that with my first son. I remember feeling like honestly, I was lazy. I got so used to like being able to have those excuses and the grace to last through those seasons. And at some point, I was like, no, I'm good now. Like, I can walk now, I can move, I feel healthier, I'm able to be more of myself. Like, why can't I pray for longer? Why can't I show up? Why can't I talk to God? Why can't I do the things that he's called me to do? And so I feel like, as mature women of God, we have to develop that spiritual sensitivity. And this can relate to any aspect of your life. When the grace lifts for the season, when God calls you to higher, you have to be able to discern that season and have that spiritual sensitivity to move with that, to move when the grace moves, to feel the conviction, to feel that steering, and to feel that nudge that's saying, like, it's time to get up, right? So grace sustains you in the valley, and purpose kind of calls you back to that, like, I can say mountain. It calls you back to that mountain. And so, just to close, what does dominating spaces mean to me? For me, dominating spaces is not about being necessarily the loudest person in the room or overpowering others. It's just about occupying every single space that God calls you to, with intention, with excellence, and with purpose. As women, I think we think of domination in terms of career and leadership and public influence. And as important as those things are, I also believe that some of the most powerful spaces that a woman can dominate are the ones that are overlooked, the ones that nobody sees: your home, your marriage, and being a mom. I think that dominating a space that, wherever God has, how do I say this? Dominating spaces looks like showing up fully in the places that God has planted you. That can look like bringing wisdom into the room, peace, discipline, and the presence of God into everyday life. So when I think about motherhood and homemaking, dominating that space for me looks like being intentional about the atmosphere that I create in my home. Okay. The values that I instill in my children, and the way I steward the family that God has entrusted to me. Because spaces are there, but they don't dominate themselves. Like, we're called to do that. This is what the Lord has called us to. We're called to be a light of the world. We're the salt of the earth. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, right? We're called to fill up space, to occupy space, to season the world, to season those spaces like salt, right? That God has called us to. And as women, especially as mothers, I think that we can carry an incredible amount of influence, whether people recognize it publicly or not, right? I think all of us can attest to the fact that our moms, whether in a good way or a bad way, have somehow influenced the people that we are today. And so I take that very seriously. I don't take that lightly. I don't want my kids to be bringing me up in therapy, child. Like, I want to be a good example, and the reason, like I said, their first church, their first ministry, right? Yeah, I'm very, very intentional about that. I try to be. I'm not perfect, but by the grace of God, I do my best to make sure that I'm recognizing that influence and also stewarding it well. That's all that I have. Thank you, guys.
Wow. Wow. It's like, I want more. Write a book. All of you, all the speakers, write a book. Like, I need more.